Hello and welcome to Eaton's latest Current Thinking broadcast, where experts share their perspectives about the biggest ideas shaping the electrical industry. My name is Jennifer Ploskina, Connected Solutions Segment Manager at Eaton. And today I'm excited to discuss a trend that's transforming the industry, and that is how digital innovation is enabling the energy transition in the home. I'm joined by a great group of panelists with unique perspectives on this topic. Today, they'll discuss the market forces shaping this trend, as well as some of the smart home energy technologies that play a key role in integrating renewables in the home. I'll first ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves, beginning with Tom Reddoch.
Hi there, I'm Tom Reddoch from the Electric Power Research Institute. Quite thrilled to be a part of this panel today. I'm a principal technical executive, which gives me a lot of latitude to work on a range of problems. However, I try to keep my focus largely on items, technology, techniques, know-how that relate to the customer and how that customer is being engaged, and especially in a period when there's so much change in how that relationship is evolving. Also, in recent times, I've been doing some things in the workforce development area, specifically with focus on training and education. Look forward to being a part of this discussion today.
Great, Tom. Up next, John Vernacchia.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm John Vernacchia. I'm the Energy Transition Segment Director for Eaton's electrical business in North America. And I work together with all our product divisions and our service team on bringing together solutions for customers who are looking to connect renewables, distributed energy resources, microgrids, EV charging infrastructure to buildings and the grid. So happy to be with you here today and looking forward to the discussion.
Awesome, thanks, John. And last but not least, Advait Katarki.
Thanks, Jennifer. Advait Katarki. I'm a product manager within Eaton. And what I really do within Eaton is, I'm working with our customers, working with our, engineering teams to kind of, develop intelligent power management technologies that enable energy transition in homes and buildings. So, really excited to be part of this and looking forward to the conversation.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, everyone, for your participation in the discussion today. This is a really big topic. So let's start by taking a step back. John, why don't you start us off by giving us some insight into the market forces at the grid level that are driving this energy transition?
Yeah, I think that's a good place to start. There's really a number of market forces that are occurring, at the bigger level. First of all is the demand for sustainability. So we see, consumers and businesses are pushing utilities to be more sustainable, and consumers themselves are trying to be more sustainable in their everyday energy use. So that's one big trend. Another one is the electrification of transportation. And so, we're starting to see now with the technology advancements in batteries and the electric vehicles themselves and more electric vehicles coming out on the market, that the total cost of ownership of electric vehicles is now, projected to reach parity with internal combustion engines relatively soon. And so that's really going to drive a pretty fast switch to electric vehicles. As a matter of fact, EVs are expected to lead to a 27% increase in global electricity demand by 2030. So that's another area. There's also regulatory pressure, and those are things in terms of goals that are being set by either states here in the US or at the federal level for trying to increase renewables. And those are being added to the grid at a pretty fast rate, and other things like battery energy storage that enable those renewables to be added to the grid. And then another area is the distributed energy resources themselves. So we'll talk about that more later in the program today, but this is the idea that renewables and other things are not only being added at the grid level, but they're being added at the building level or at the home level as well too, so kind of at the grid edge. And so this creates, a lot of opportunities. There's now this whole bi-directional flow of power. Power isn't just coming from a central utility generation plant anymore. It can flow both ways. And so this is kind of where at Eaton we've adopted an everything as a grid approach in really thinking about, how do you manage that bi-directional flow of energy? So, at Eaton, when we talk about everything as a grid, what we're really talking about is managing those renewables at the grid level, but also managing them at the building level. So whether you're at an industrial factory, a commercial building, or a residential home, each of those can be thought of as a grid unto themselves. And how does power flow in multiple directions? How do you manage that to be most sustainable, safe, and efficient, and meet sustainability goals?
Great, thanks, John. That was a great overview. I'd like to send it over to Tom for a utility perspective on these market factors and how grid operators are responding.
Thanks, Jennifer. John, you've made some really good points, and I want to go back and kind of pick up on a couple of those and emphasize where I think the electric industry as a whole, utilities in particular, since they are really the key resource that treats all aspects of the grid today. This theme of moving from centralized to decentralized, this is really significant. And the main reason being is that we have a lot of infrastructure that has been built around this notion of centralized production and ultimately delivery. So when we bring in distributed assets, at the top of the list is trying to understand how do we use them and how do we use them effectively. So that is really the first key item in my mind. The second one is the rapid transition that digital technology is really invading the entire process. We have a system, not only was it a centralized arrangement, but it was truly very much an analog driven process. The electric power system is very physical, and it's quite easy to see how analog fits that. Now comes digital. And digital in many respects is an abstraction from the physical. And in that abstraction, we have to learn how to think and operate in the digital format. That is a major task that utilities as operators of the system is facing. And to pick up, John, on your other theme, the role and environment that's playing going forward, it's huge because it is absolutely changing the way we do business. Solar is rapidly gaining strength. We have energy storage that's coming along. All of these are about trying for us to meet two major goals. How do we operate the system more efficiently? And how do we minimize, let's say, carbon footprint? These are big drivers that are pushing us very much towards these alternative solutions. So at the end of the day, we have this collage of new technologies that are entering, and the challenge that the electric utilities face is how to take these new assets and make them integrate with the system, not just connect. That is, how do we use these assets in an optimal way? Large challenge for the industry.
Yeah, absolutely. Good perspective. Thank you, Tom. You know, John mentioned the increasing proliferation of distributed energy resources. Advait, what specifically do we mean when we refer to DERs?
Yeah, thanks, Jennifer. So in a broad sense, distributed energy resources, or DERs, are physical and virtual assets that are deployed across the distribution grid, typically close to the grid, usually behind the meter. And these can be used individually or in aggregate to provide value to the grid, or individual or together. And DERs can include solar panels, battery energy storage, small generators, electric vehicles, and controllable variable loads. So they bring a lot of value to individual consumers by helping with resiliency, energy costs, sustainability. But the one question that we keep all ask, right, how do they affect the grid? John touched a little bit on that, Tom touched a little bit on that. So, DERs can really support a more flexible and an efficient grid, providing energy capacity, ancillary services to the distribution, as well as bulk power systems. But if they're not integrated and managed well, they can represent a significant threat to the utilities and the power system in general. So we need a way to not just effectively integrate them, but also kind of manage them in a way that benefits the customer, values the role of the utility, and maximizes their value and improves grid operations. So that's where the distributed energy resource management systems come into play, or as we refer to as DERMS. They help utilities, reduce the risk, get more value from existing DERs while preparing for a future where even greater levels of DERs will be present on a grid.
Very cool. Thank you so much. John, I think you may have had some perspective here too.
Yeah, to kind of build on what Advait was saying, there's also the ability to now aggregate together multiple locations, whether that's at the residential level or the commercial building level, for these distributed energy resources that Advait outlined. And that creates an opportunity to not only optimize the energy use at the particular site or facility, but then sort of join those facilities together to participate in grid programs and provide power back to the grid for excess power that isn't needed at the local level. So you might hear the term virtual power plants being used, and that's the concept of taking advantage of perhaps excess renewable solar at midday or battery capabilities, energy stored in batteries at multiple sites, and sort of pull that all together from multiple sites and make it available to the grid in an organized manner. So that's when we hear this sort of concept of virtual power plant. And there's other type of programs that haven't even been imagined yet or introduced that I'm sure Tom can probably comment on things that utilities are looking at to kind of take advantage of these distributed energy resources in a more proactive way.
John, yeah, let me add just a little bit to your thought there. I think the first big change that we're seeing is now that the classic consumer is actually becoming a producer, and in so doing that, now we see these assets actually being owned and operated and to some extent managed by end users. And this is quite a change in the philosophy about how the electric system actually works overall. That is really causing a certain amount of reordering in the process. So first of all, learning how to absorb that in regular electric system operations is one of the next challenges that we're facing. This whole notion of the consumer owning production assets, not just consuming assets, has coined this phrase prosumer, which is the concept of an engaged end user that sometimes is strictly a consumer. Other periods, they may be almost a pure producer, and then some hybrid of that as we go through the time of day. By the way, that's a really, really important point to make. It's not like it's the same every hour or almost even every minute. And it's this constant change with this new role of the prosumer that will further add to the mark. And then the last point I want to make is we've got all of this coming and going, producing, consuming. I think that the big challenge, I'll just introduce a term, and along the way, I'm sure we'll kick this around a little more, is what I call net load now. The term net load implying that at the point that we used to think about as pure consumption, now has all these different properties of producing and acting in a hybrid way. And being able to manage that. Early efforts at trying to manage these edge of grid assets, like your term, John, these edge of grid assets, we've turned ourselves to what is oftentimes called DERMS, DER management system. This is our early stage of trying to put some type of management and control and measurement capability as well with these systems. So with that, I think we've really had the stage set here very nicely for our ongoing discussion.
Yeah, really interesting stuff. And John brought up the concept of virtual power plant and regulatory opportunities early on. So we've got a new order from FERC, the 2222, which supports that over time. But yeah, really interesting stuff. Tom, I wonder, if you could give us a utility perspective on some of the biggest hurdles you're seeing to the adoption of DERs and integration of renewables to the grid.
I think the first thing is to continue following this core theme of our discussion, and that is to understand how to go about using the decentralized asset. And the reason being is that, for heavens, I don't know, for the last 70 or 80 years, we have been driving ourselves to a system configuration where we're going to produce power centrally, and then we're going to ship it down to the point of consumption. There is a really interesting history. If you go back to the teens, 1915, back in that 19, not the 21 year we're in today. In the early days, everything was distributed. And what we did is we worked very hard to take all these distributed assets, aggregate them, and build this central strategy. And now here we are today. Suddenly, yesterday is today. We sometimes forget how these transitions actually take place, but we've made that move now, and we're moving back towards decentralized assets. Some people ask, well, how or why did that happen? And it's all about technology innovation. And whereas early we saw optimization, when I say optimization, I normally think about economics, and I think about how to operate things effectively. But we saw the best economics in aggregating. And it's really the solar revolution and the digital revolution that's really enabling us to, again, re-examine how do we do business with this new decentralized asset. John, you made a good point earlier. Part of building this central system, it was a one-way flow. All bets are off now. We have flow going in every direction. And one of the things that we forget about sometimes is that we build our systems to be safe. And so the protection strategies that are built in, if there's a fault of any sort on the system, how do we either safely isolate it or prevent it from some sort of cascading problem? And now suddenly digital gets a big play, because now we need adaptable protective strategies, because power could be going in any direction. So that really becomes a key item. And then last is, of course, managing this. I touched a little bit previously on about the DERMS approach. I think the DERMS approach, as it is today, is not necessarily the way we will do it in the future, but it is certainly part of the transition strategy.
Great. You bring up a good point about safety being the first and foremost priority. So thank you for that. And I know, Advait, you're familiar with the companies participating in how to manage that challenging management of the DERMS. Would you like to add more?
Yeah, absolutely. And there are, a whole host of, entities, who are not just kind of, providing the PV and storage package to the consumers, right? But there's another set of companies who are kind of, helping utilities aggregate these and kind of acting, making sure that these are, acting as a net positive to the utility. So it's a very important partnership, I think, between the utilities, the aggregators, as well as kind of the entities that are helping kind of deploy these PV and storage systems out on the grid. And definitely, when you kind of think of it from a consumer standpoint, this is all very new. This is new levels of detail for them in the energy space, which is very overwhelming, right? It's no longer as simple as you move into your home, you just contact your utility, set up an account, and there you go, your lights are on. So there's a lot for them to kind of, process. And, I believe, there's a key role that utilities can kind of, play in this space by being an advisor for the consumers and kind of helping them choose, what's right for them based on their energy use, based on the situation, what incentives that are available from a utility standpoint, from a regulatory standpoint. So, as you kind of think of, the potential friction that exists in this whole value chain, I believe, utilities can kind of play a key role in kind of removing that friction and really helping us, drive adoption of DERs.
Really good point. John, we know that this market is emerging but growing. Can you share a little insight on that end?
Yeah, as you know, Jennifer, as with any new market, there's lots of people getting into the energy transition space and these distributed energy resources. So, it's pretty fragmented right now. You have solar PV companies, you have battery energy storage companies, you have electric vehicle companies, you have, traditional power distribution equipment players like Eaton in this space. So, there's lots of people there, and that can make it kind of confusing for installers, integrators, electrical contractors, not to mention the homeowner themselves, right? Who is the energy user. So I think that's, one of the hurdles as an industry we need to address is, how do we kind of come together as technology providers of these different distributed energy resources and work together with utilities so that, we can make it easier for all the stakeholders in the ecosystem and the value chain and kind of, make homeowners feel more comfortable and then also, the installing contractors who are putting these systems together.
Yeah, definitely. You just talked about homeowners for sure being confused. But so now that we've covered some of the drivers and challenges with DERs at the grid level, let's dig a bit deeper into what this means for the home. John, you talked earlier about Eaton's everything as a grid approach. In many ways, the same forces driving energy transition at the grid level are having a transformative effect on the residential sector. We call this home as a grid. And John, I'd love for you to talk a bit more about what this means and the factors that are contributing to it.
Yeah, as I had just mentioned, all the things that are happening at the grid level are coming into the home as well too. And so, we have solar PV being added on homes. And, we know in California, for example, all new home construction 3 stories or below need to have solar as one of their options to meet the state's energy efficiency goals. And many times those solar systems are being coupled with battery energy storage. And also, those same kind of homeowners are likely early adopters of electric vehicles. So, how do all these things work together at the home level so that they can be, coordinated? And so, one of the challenges is how do you reduce the system complexity when you have not only the utility feed, bringing you power, but you also have power being generated locally from your own solar PV system on your roof, and you may be storing that at midday when there's, a lot of sun being generated. So, there's lots of complexities on how we manage that efficiently. And then how do you couple that with also managing, loads in the home as well too. So you kind of have this, management challenge of both, managing loads in the home and what are my local generation assets generating and what am I able to buy from my utility. And so there's, complexities in that. And so those are some of the things, the technologies that are being worked on to make that all work together more seamlessly. So there's, a lot of industry players in this space. I mean, we're starting to see, solar integrators also offering battery storage systems. And then there's, the whole sort of energy management system, at the commercial building level and the residential building level as well too. And the goal of all that is to kind of, make it easier to integrate these multiple solutions and manage that bi-directional flow of power and the ability to store energy at the local level and do that in conjunction in harmony with the local utility as well too.
Yeah, I've been reading studies that show, going back to some of the driving factors of our concept of home as a grid, the idea that consumers or homeowners are driven by sustainability efforts or environmentally friendly has actually surpassed saving money just recently. So that's for sure a driving factor. And then, we also see, going back to some of Tom's comments, utilities are putting in structures that incentivize or motivate the homeowner to want these behind the meter DER solutions. Things like demand response programs, time of use, price structures. So those are all absolutely contributing. And, we're also finding the driving adoption for these DERs is companies looking at different financial models. So traditionally for these types of solutions, you buy the hardware up front and you get the benefit. Well, that investment can be substantial in some cases. So different financing models where maybe there's a lease option or you're paying for a subscription over time rather than upfront capital investment. Yeah, Tom, John and I have talked a little bit about what we're seeing. Can you add on from a utility perspective?
Let me, this is a great theme we have going here. And I must say, it's exciting to be involved when we're seeing an industry undergo such dramatic changes. And the history item here that I would like to underscore is that the electric load, as we have envisioned it historically, has kind of been the sacred cow, if you wish, in the sense that the strategy that electric utilities will have always followed is that we will build supply and a delivery system that will follow that load wherever it goes. And today, suddenly, we see the opportunity to really change the way things are done. Yes, actually, the load is becoming a part of the electric system. We're empowering it with flexibility in terms of how and when you might use your electricity. And at the same time, we're also adding that production component. And what this does is that it changes the boundary. Before we had a nice clear boundary. When you got to the meter, that was a pretty hard boundary that separated the end user from the electric system. That's just simply going out the door. And what is key in my mind with this new focus on, the home as a grid is that we need innovation in terms of technology to make this work well. As certainly this group here, EPRI has been working with Eaton for the last several years on this device we call the Energy Management Circuit Breaker. And this device is an example of innovative technology that is allowing us to really begin to make this grid, this home grid, if you wish, a reality. These are the kind of innovations that I expect we're going to need much of that as we go forward.
Great segue, Tom. With all of this interesting background, and I love the history you're sharing, Tom, and the fact that the meter was a barrier historically, but it still doesn't come without some challenges at the residential level. Thankfully, there are technologies that are helping alleviate some of these challenges. Advait, can you talk us through the technologies Eaton is contributing that enable the home as a grid environment?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Jennifer. So as we kind of think of, energy transition and enhanced deployment of DERs, right, and their effect on the grid, as Tom kind of alluded to, what's apparent is for grid operators and utilities to ensure that these are a net positive for the power value chain. We need new levels of insight and often control at the grid edge. Even for homeowners, right? It's not just about, flipping a switch and the light turns on. There's an added thought of, okay, where is that electricity coming from? Am I getting it from my PV? Am I getting it from utility or my storage? So, we don't just need power management, but we need intelligent power management. And that's really where our focus has been. Let's take an example of, circuit breakers, right? They've been part of a key component of our power distribution system for years. And, they've provided safety as well as circuit protection. Now, we are teaching in new things, right? We've added cloud connectivity to it. We've added remote control. We've added revenue grade metering, in addition to the core functionality that it has always done, which is, provide safety, which always does. And that's our energy management circuit breaker. So again, Tom alluded to that. It's a technology that, we work with EPRI and, several other utilities to really understand, what does the market need? What are the key different stakeholders need? And we've taken all of that input and build that technology. And, with these intelligent power management devices, right, what do they do, right? It allows consumers, facility managers, utilities to have real-time insight at the grid edge. They're providing analytics on what's happening at the branch circuit level. And often, where needed, they're providing discrete control. And, we are able to kind of, take all of this and provide an incredible amount of data and providing that access to data to these different stakeholders. And when you kind of think of, hey, I'm connecting my power distribution system and so on and stuff, there are a lot of concerns around cybersecurity and so on and stuff. And that's been kind of a key focus for us, right? With our Bright Layer digital platform, we are providing this in a manner that's safe and secure. So that's certainly something that, we've been kind of focused on developing. And it's not just, providing that data, right? Kind of being able to kind of look at the electrical data signatures and using that to, potentially help you understand, what's happening with your appliances. Are your appliances still energy efficient, right? So being able to kind of take that data and provide that predictive diagnostics and suggestions to the homeowner. So those are some of the things that we've been working on. But Jennifer, even you've been involved, right, with different parts of our businesses and talking to customers. So, what can you add about, some of the initiatives around smart load center and wiring devices that we've been doing?
Yeah, again, really exciting times in the industry, right? So in addition to the energy management circuit breaker, we have our load center offering, which incorporates that EMCB along with all of our other electronic and thermal mag breakers. So we offer to the market a smart load center in that way. Also tying back to the DER or the renewable integration, we do have a good supply of solar load centers out in the market already. And we actually supply market leading solar installers with our load center interiors to integrate into their overall system. We also focus on our wiring devices, light switches, dimmers, and receptacles. We've been building what we call smart wiring devices for years that operate both in with Z-Wave Plus and now Wi-Fi that only add to the ecosystem, giving homeowners, utilities in some cases, the ability to control loads and just really manage that whole system actually behind the meter. And you mentioned Bright Layer, Advait. I don't know if many people know this, but this is a foundational digital platform that Eaton has been building for years. And it enables us to add more and more connected devices that support both connected ecosystems and energy transition solutions into the market. So yeah, really, really exciting. And I have been very involved in our cybersecurity efforts. You mentioned that earlier, Advait. I happen to know that our cybersecurity internal requirements and processes are the robust in the industry. So it's really great to know that that's what we lead with because we are a safety and security-based company. Thanks, everyone. Now let's look into the future. I'd like us to examine some trends on the horizon that will help shape the home as a grid environment moving forward. Tom, what are some of these trends and what kind of near-term impact do you expect them to have?
I think there are 2 or 3 items that are really going to dominate in the near term in terms of how we keep driving towards this a very localized solution now, as opposed to all of it being the centralized perspective. So first of all, you made an excellent point a little earlier, Jennifer, about the fact that people are making choices about looking at solutions that are sustainable. In fact, they may be favoring those over the lowest economic solution. And the reason being is that they're passionate about what that means. And I think that there certainly will be an element of our future as this rolls out where those kinds of often labeled green choices will be made, and people will make it because it's the way they believe things should be. And that is part of how a market gets defined. But that's going to be with us, and I think it's going to be a permanent part. The other thing is that both state and federal governments are really contributing towards this transition. One is that they're making available fiscal assets to help people realize some of these alternate solutions. And, you know, those fiscal supports, if you wish, come as incentives to adopt technology A or B, or what might I do with PV, or even maybe a more efficient device. All of these are a part of encouraging prudency in terms of how we go forward. We will see a lot of this stimulus, if you wish, coming in the storage area. We have storage, local electric storage, not necessarily thermal energy storage, but electric energy storage. We see that getting a much bigger play. And John, you mentioned earlier, I want to really emphasize this because I think it's poised to be one of the largest drivers, and that's the role that electric transportation. And the thing about it is that charging people's automobiles at home is a high priority. And in so doing that is a significant electric load that's going to be present. Now, one of the things about it, this new electric load that's coming in, it's likely to come in as a managed load to begin with. Because it's a storage device effectively, you know, you can manage it. You can turn it off and on. You can select periods when you want to charge. You can, as you mentioned earlier about rates, Jennifer, those rates might induce people to charge in certain periods. But that is the other large part of this change at the home.
Awesome. Thanks. Advait, do you have anything to add to that future view?
Yeah, thanks, Jennifer. Tom, you know, what you mentioned is really interesting. In fact, you know, recently we did like a pilot of about 100 homes. We call it like the Intelligent Power Analytics pilot, where we outfitted about 100 homes with, you know, state-of-art, you know, Eaton power management technology. And what we found was, you know, the households that have electric vehicles, we saw that almost electric vehicle charging took about like 40 to 60% of the overall energy usage of the home. So, you know, you're spot on. I think as you know, people, you know, move towards driving electric and driving, you know, charging these at homes, it's going to be a big factor on what does that energy usage look like in home. But, you know, when you think of electrification, right, it's much more broader, I feel. You know, there are municipalities in California and other parts of the country as well, you know, who are incentivizing and even in some cases mandating the move away from, you know, gas-powered appliances to electric appliances. And that's really kind of, you know, pushing the home, you know, pushing everyone towards whole home electrification. It has its own challenges, right? You have some, you know, legacy homes, you know, who have, you know, 60 amp or 100 amp service, and you're adding more and more electricity, electrical load to it. So there's always going to be a challenge. And I think that's where I think companies like Eaton are uniquely positioned to help the homeowners and the facility owners to, you know, make that transition in a very effective manner by able to, you know, managing which loads are turned on when. And that's another trend that we're seeing, right? It's not just about how much energy you consume. As you kind of think of penetrations of DERs, especially solar, these are variable, you know, energy sources. You know, during afternoon, you know, solar is generating energy, you know, it's probably not generating at night. So what's going to be important is time managed loads, right? So it's no longer going to be just what you consume, but also when you consume. So I think those are the couple of things that, you know, we are going to be seeing, and which is pretty exciting, right? We as an industry, I think these are great challenges to, you know, solve.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. John, with these innovations either happening now or coming in the near future, what needs to happen for Home as a Grid to deliver on its promise?
I think one of the important points is you know, collaboration and partnerships, because there's a lot of companies operating in this space. And so, you know, what can we as an industry do to help reduce some of the complexity, removing the barriers to adoption, making implementation and installation easier for contractors and integrators who are putting these distributed energy resources together, and you know, helping how they interface with a utility system who may be, as to Tom's point, wanting to kind of look in at the home level and see what's happening at the home. And so I think those are, some of the areas that innovation is being worked on today. I know it is at Eaton, and I know at a lot of other companies. And we're seeing stronger collaboration and partnerships between different players in the space to help make that a reality and make it simpler and easier to install these systems going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Tom, from a utility perspective, what does the industry expect from suppliers like Eaton?
Well, let me just tag on to a little bit of John's closing comment. I think that we are if home as a grid is going to be part of the greater grid, then having transparency to be able to manage these assets collectively is essential. I really believe that in the most sincere way. Consequently, there is need for technology innovation. It's not business as usual. We need fresh products. The entire supplier network needs to come forward with good, innovative solutions. And I think that what is emerging now as I think the central theme is the load center. Now that becomes that we talked about or introduced the notion of net load, and that is the net effect of all of these items. Well, that netting occurs right there at the load center. So the load center gets unduly focused. If you look at the EMCB, in my mind, it was the first step towards making the load center a much richer component in the electric system by being able to incorporate smarts. And certainly the EMCB is one part of that solution in the sense that it allows you to apply smarts, measurement, control, communications at the circuit level in the panel. But as we step back, the larger question is, how do we best go about making the load center so much a part of this home solution? And that indeed is could be that the panel itself needs to be smart. That's the other end of the spectrum. And I suspect that our solutions going forward, as we look for the best economic outcomes, sometimes the entire load center being smart may be the best approach. I think in other cases, just on sheer economics, maybe you're managing fewer in-use components, then the attacking at the breaker level is the best way. But one thing for sure is that doing things through the load center is really what that future is about. And in fact, if we made the main circuit breaker a smart one, it really raises the question, do we need a meter anymore? Remember,
Intriguing.
a meter was, this is really important because, ask yourself, why did we have a meter? So somebody could come by and read it.
Mm-hmm.
Now that we read meters digitally, do we really need the meter under the glass? I'll just leave it at that.
Advait, we spent some time earlier talking about smart home energy solutions Eaton is delivering, all of which play a role in the home as a grid approach. What opportunities does Eaton have to help drive this transformation forward?
Yeah, thanks, Jennifer. And as we've kind of played in this space, and we've been powering the use of smart home energy management for years. But one thing that we've realized is this: one company can't just do it all. You really to be able to kind of bring a complete solution to the consumers, we need to kind of partner with different companies. There's a portion of solution we provide, but over the years, right, we've kind of built a partner ecosystem where we work together to jointly solve consumer problems, and that's kind of built in our DNA. But as we kind of think about just home as a grid, right, that's more important now than ever. And when we kind of think of partners, right, there are just so many different types of partners. John alluded to that earlier. Just the market is fragmented, but we can kind of put those in two broad buckets, right? One is certainly, the DER OEMs or even like the smart home providers, right? And in my mind, I think the lines are blurring between those two. Can you really have a smart home without having smart home energy management? So I think there's kind of a natural grouping that's happening. And the second aspect of that is utility aggregators, right? So as you kind of think of, more and more DERs coming onto the grid, it's going to be important to have collaboration with those aggregators who are working for the utilities and kind of helping those, kind of manage those together from a grid perspective. But John, you worked a lot, with our integrators and with our partners, right? Anything you'll add to that?
Yeah, I think there's, a lot happening in this whole distributed energy resource space that aligns with the sustainability goals that individual homeowners have and we all have as consumers, but also, for companies as well too. And, Eaton, for example, we have our own commitments to sustainability. We've recently announced some goals where we're pledging a 50% reduction in carbon emissions by 2030 as a validation of that commitment. As a corporation, we've been producing an annual sustainability report every year as part of our annual report for several years now. And so I think, the whole sustainability thing is really tied into managing these distributed energy resources. And, another example here at Eaton, we recently announced a microgrid we'll be adding at one of our circuit breaker manufacturing facilities in Puerto Rico, where we'll be adding solar PV, battery storage, and have them work together to provide resiliency and CO2 reduction for our own carbon footprint at that facility, but also to help benefit the local utility grid as well too. So, there's a very strong connection between these distributed energy resources and sustainability goals that companies have, and all the way down to homeowners and consumers.
Hey, in the interest of time, I'm going to move to our final question, and that has to do with collaboration. As we know, no one company can drive this innovation forward on their own. John, how do you feel the industry can better collaborate to continue and accelerate the current path of innovation?
Yeah, as we've talked about, there's a lot of different players in this space, and a lot of it, like, Tom was saying, depends on information and information flow. So having standard communication protocols for smart home technology, I think, is really an area where there's a lot of collaboration happening today and needs to continue in the future. So there are standards being developed. There's one called Connected Home via IP or CHIP, but there are other ones, that are being developed as well too. So, power distribution companies like Eaton and solar PV companies and other distributed energy resource suppliers, really need to collaborate together in these kind of standards organizations, both on the communication side and on the power flow side as well too. And then, what can we do to help build consumer confidence in the adoption of renewables and make consumers feel more comfortable, such that, adding solar or battery storage or an electric vehicle charger, feels, more common and not as unusual, and make it easy, for consumers to do that. And then, I think another area is the technology suppliers in collaboration with the utilities is a really important step. And here at Eaton, we've been working with EPRI, for the last 2 years, as Tom mentioned, with some field trial programs for the energy management circuit breaker. So I think it's really important that technology suppliers and utility companies continue to collaborate with each other to help drive the adoptions going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And I should mention, as this trends of energy transition continue, it's probably important to note that, many companies are setting sustainability goals, including Eaton. So that is just going to drive more adoption. Companies are going to need ways to support that, as will homeowners. So all of these solutions that we've talked about and collaborations will be a big part of that. Tom, final thoughts on the industry collaboration and partnership?
So let me, I'll try to be succinct here. Let me just hit a few themes that I think are important. Really coming off your closing comments, John, and I wanted to add an additional one there, and that is education. We really need to educate the consumer of the future such that that they understand getting into the energy business is not simple. And being an informed user will really be a helpful part of that. Number two is that we're introducing a lot of new technology. That means there needs to be workforce development on the utility side also to advance. It's hard to incorporate new technologies when you have a workforce that's not familiar. So part of getting those in place is actually advancing the workforce itself. And to me, the overpowering theme in all of this is digital. It's not a passing thing. It is coming today and it is the future. And therefore, we're going to have to really take that element and make it integral with the process. And the last thing is, wow, do we have a stew on our hands now? We have utilities producing, we have consumers producing, we have pro-consumers, we have third parties in the mix. Wow, that's what a revolution is all about. You know, you get many entrants, and understanding how to get us all on the same page. That's our big challenge. Back to you, Jennifer.
Education, 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 right? Thanks, Tom, so much for that perspective. And I'd like to thank all of our panelists again for taking the time to talk through this really exciting topic. You've given our audience a lot to take away, and hopefully the points made today will lead them to think about how they can work together and partner with Eaton to move forward our home as a grid concept. If you'd like to learn more about innovations in smart home energy management, please visit eaton.com/smartenergy. Thanks again to all of you for watching, and we look forward to sharing more insights with you on our next Current Thinking broadcast.